So, Assassin's Creed Origins. Well, it's an Assassin's Creed game. After playing for about 5 hours, I decided that I wasn't going to write about it because I didn't find anything egregious enough or great enough to really discuss. But by the time I'd gotten to 15 hours, I knew I had to. Because AC Origins is so painfully average, it ends up being a lesson about scope, ambition, polish, and losing sight of what the core vision of your game is. If you like what I have to say or how I sound saying it, do me a favor and like, subscribe, comment, all that. As I always do, let's very quickly go over the history here. The first Assassin's Creed game released almost exactly 2 years after the 7th generation of home video game consoles came out. And as we all know now, early in a console generation, the games are barely distinguishable from the best titles of the previous iterations, and it often takes a couple of years just to build a library out. More importantly, it takes a couple of years for games that were developed specifically for the new hardware to appear. As such, the first Assassin's Creed game arrived at the perfect time. Now, it was certainly a fresh title. Loosely based on the Prince of Persia style platforming, it had unique gameplay, state-of-the-art animations, and tremendous maps. Yes, there were issues. Climbing, one of the core mechanics, was often janky. Combat was basically button mashing. The stealth could be annoying, and most of the missions were very similar. But for a first game, it was promising. Coupled with a massive marketing campaign, it was a huge mainstream commercial success. That success led to yearly installments, and as such, there has been shockingly little evolution of the core gameplay here. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing. Uncharted, which everyone except for me seems to absolutely love, made 4 of the same games. Call of Duty is basically the same thing year in and year out. But the problem with AC is that it's been making yearly installments of a game that was never mechanically perfected, and certainly wasn't tight or polished. Each game in the series up to Black Flag had felt like it was the one that was almost really good. And in fact, the further we get from Black Flag, a legitimately wonderful game that had perfected naval combat and featured an engaging story, the more that game looks like a fluke. With critical reception and sales becoming more and more muted, Ubisoft finally made the decision to take a step back and give the series the refresh it desperately needed. And Origins did do much better in reviews, though I'm going to argue that reviewers gave it far too much credit for change itself rather than whether those changes made the game any more fun than it had been. In fact, I think it's pretty obvious that they still didn't take enough time. This game is riddled with small bugs that we'll get to later, and it's obvious that instead of really taking their time and deciding to create a game that perfected the soul of what the series is, instead what happened is a bunch of market research people were used to shape this thing. Now, most very good games do one or two things exceptionally well. Bayonetta featured almost perfect, fast-paced, combo-centered hack-and-slash combat that holds up to this very day. Destiny has its flawlessly smooth FPS shooting mechanics. And the very best games generally do a few things really, really well. Soulsborne has perfect combat. It works because of tender loving care being paid to animations and stamina management, and the game then uses that mechanic within expertly crafted levels, set within a world with best-in-class environmental storytelling. Uncharted, again I'm not a fan, but I can see what it does well, uses movie-quality cutscene direction and acting, and gives the illusion of fully interactive set pieces that allow the player to feel like they are controlling an action film. The Witcher. It creates a living, breathing world of moral complexity with genuine emotion and satisfying and varied combat. It allows the player to explore a real world in motion. Ubisoft's own Far Cry series creates a huge and detailed open world sandbox and gives players the tools to wreak havoc in it with a huge variety of vehicles and armaments. It gives you the freedom to tackle encounters through stealth or mayhem or however you see fit. The problem with Assassin's Creed is that it's never settled on what it really wants to do well. Now, if the series is known for anything, it's probably the parkour movement system, but 10 years in, the system is still at times frustrating and strangely linear. You can climb most things, but not anything. Sometimes you'll jump off a wall to your death, while others, it feels so on rails you won't be able to scramble over a low fence. There is much less freedom of movement than one would expect. And the mechanic itself, it's barely gameplay. If AC wanted to lean heavy into this system, and that might in fact be an idea, They could have used a stamina system, or make the platforming elements have fail states so there are stakes to your actions. At least they should have gone back to the platforming puzzles of the early games. Or maybe Assassin's Creed is about the stealth mechanics? Now, if anything, Origins has tried to de-emphasize the stealth. But if AC wanted to focus hard on stealth, they could institute dynamic lighting effects like Thief. They could have created Hitman-style infiltration gameplay, or have a skill tree that features fun and interesting stealth-based skills, in the vein of Dishonored, though obviously less magical. Is it the combat? AC Combat has always been looking for an identity. In Origins, they've gone to a mix of 3D Zelda and Soulsborne, though it's far more Zelda than Dark Souls. What makes Dark Souls so satisfying is the depth of the mechanics. Stamina management, varied weapon movesets, parrying, magic. From Software creates a very structured system that forces you to adapt to it. Origins gives us a lock-on strafing without the stamina management, or consistent animation-based dodging. Souls works because you learn the way the enemies attack. The fodder enemies attack in one or two specific ways, while the difficult ones have large pools of animations to choose from. The game arises from recognizing and learning to react to the different animations, and when to apply your large kit of responses. AC Origins takes the very basic elements of this system, without having any of the depth or risk that the system requires to be fun and engaging. And it lacks polish. The range of the lock-on is poor, and it's difficult to know if you're close enough to engage an enemy. There are basically 3 enemy types, so for the most part, it doesn't take long to be right back where we were in the previous installments, just face-rolling through enemies without any real effort. Violence in video games is always somewhat fun, but the combat here never rises above adequate, which is exactly where we were in the last games. So AC seems to want to be the jack of all these trades and the master of none, and that leaves it in a strange spot. And it begs the question of why. Why doesn't AC pick one or two of these mechanics and flesh it out into a compelling bit of gameplay? And the answer to that is the other thing that AC thinks it does well. It's known for crafting tremendous, absurdly large maps with the veneer of historical accuracy. And rather than being the strength it was at the beginning of the series, it's become a burden for the game. The maps are indeed enormous. So large that it's almost impossible to do the kind of intuitive signposting that players need to be directed. You're going to find yourself regularly opening the map and scrolling about looking for icons to chase so that you can progress further. Now, does this add a sense of realism by de-emphasizing the gamey quest hubs we've all grown accustomed to? Sure, but I'll say it until I'm blue in the face or developers start listening. In a contest between fun and realism, fun should win every time. And there's nothing particularly fun about hovering over a map and then traveling a significant distance to find your next task. Especially when your next task is just an extremely uninspired gamey quest. This problem has crept into other aspects of the design as well. Assassin's Creed has to have a huge map because that's what an Assassin's Creed game has to have. This means player navigation and traversal needs to be dealt with. Fast traveling everywhere is immersion breaking and runs the risk of players never seeing all the work the developers did to program palm trees and fishing nets and baskets and shrubs. So AC has to have mounts. But the distances are long, and AC doesn't trust its content to keep you invested, so you have the option of simply pressing a button to have the horse autopilot its way to your objective. The AI is really bad, so this does provide some fun as pedestrians blithely wander in front of your galloping steed to be trampled to death, but by the 30th time you've run over a nameless NPC, you'll be annoyed at the way they're slowing your progress. Other games have managed to make horse travel a fun mechanic in itself. Red Dead Redemption basically set the standard, and The Witcher 3 kept it. I'm kind of baffled at the choice to simplify an already simple mechanic. The removal of the ability to sprint can be dumped into this bucket as well. In order to craft a map so large and detailed, other compromises have to be made. NPC models are reused often, sometimes to hilarious effect. In the bathhouse during a quest, one obscenely hairy man was having a conversation in the middle of the room. After marveling at his fur, I moved along only to find his doppelganger in the very next group. Once, I had 2 quest givers of the same character model consecutively. These were not uncommon occurrences. I encountered a consistent bug where the sound would just drop out until I reset the console. Which brings us to the amazing lack of polish here. This game is riddled with strange little bugs. Everything from NPC and enemy pathing, to physics problems, to, absolutely terrible facial animations and lip syncing. When I purchase an indie game on Steam, I don't expect AAA polish. But when I buy a game from Ubisoft, I'm expecting a pretty darn polished experience worthy of the AAA price tag. The writing here is very, very bad, and voice acting ranges from lifelessly adequate to high school drama club terrible. The progression system's lackluster, being simultaneously too large and slow, but also offering almost no game-altering changes. The story begins almost incoherently. I waited hours for it to start before realizing I was already halfway through. So, what does this game do well? Well, it looks good, but not great, just good. The combat's fun enough, but not great, just pretty fun. Finding loot is fun. The map is very cool. They obviously put an obscene amount of time into creating a very impressive Ptolemaic-era Egypt, but even there, why would you choose the Ptolemaic dynasty rather than the First Dynasty era? Think of the narrative space available to you during the building of the pyramids, rather than one of the most studied and dissected eras in human history. Being less historically based might open up mountains of gameplay possibilities. The franchise has no problem leaning into ancient aliens type conspiracy, so set the game in 10,000 BC, at a time when the ancestor race was building the pyramids with magic. Worry about what will make the game fun, then build a world and map around that fun gameplay. AC has been doing it the wrong way around. They've been picking an era, building a map, and then trying to find fun in the world they've created. This, finally, brings me to why I started writing and making videos about games. Now, I played a lot of games growing up. I started with an Atari 2600, made my way through a Commodore 64, and all the important systems until I moved out of my house at 18. At that point, I traded games for punk rock and started playing in bands full-time, barely making enough to eat. As such, I missed gaming from about 1995 to 2013. In those 18 years, I played World of Warcraft, from vanilla through Cataclysm, and the occasional PC game, but it was more likely that our electricity had been turned off than that I would have enough money to buy a game and pay my WoW subscription. In 2013, we became suddenly lower middle class after my wife's years of school and my years of manual labor paid off, and we suddenly had a bit of disposable income. So I bought an Xbox 360 used for $20 off Craigslist. Buying a console at the end of a generation is an amazing thing. There were 7 years of amazing games to play. I finished basically every single title of note from the system before buying the new consoles and making a decent gaming PC. But that experience spoiled me. The new generation has shown me that the releases of great games are exceedingly rare. In a good year, there are maybe 3 good AAA releases, 5 to 10 short but great indie Steam games, and a mountain of mediocrity. And it's because of games like Assassin's Creed Origins. The industry is stuck in a rut. Games that take chances are rare. Games that put in the effort to create unique systems or finely tuned experiences, they don't come along often. I've simply run out of great games to play, and the AAA developers refuse to take the time or put in the effort to deserve the price tag they're charging for these games. So I've started writing. Now, is there fun to be had in Assassin's Creed Origins? Yeah, sure. Video games are almost all fun if they work. There's something uniquely satisfying about them. One rarely gets to see the consequences for their actions immediately. Games do the same thing for me that playing baseball in high school did. They do the same thing that playing shows with an indie rock band did. They provide instant feedback. They give a challenge that's either passed or failed. They occupy time with at least the illusion of consequence. But AC Origins also is an excellent example of the difference between a great experience and one that only occupies time. The difference between seeing Fugazi or Wilco or Magnetic Fields and watching a cover band in a bar. Both are pleasant ways to pass the time. One is memorable, the other is entirely forgettable. Assassin's Creed Origins is a cover band of itself. It could be more. It's got the resources, the audience, the base mechanics to craft something truly memorable. But I'm done waiting. How many more times am I expected to pay $60 in hopes that they finally pull it off? Video games are the only place where I will regularly invest dozens of hours into something I consider mediocre at best. I don't buy mediocre albums. There are too many transcendent ones. I don't watch mediocre or any television shows really. I don't go watch movies that are only okay, but I'll consistently pay $60 and invest 40 hours into a game I'm barely enjoying. Maybe that's because games age worse than any other medium. I mean, a Sam Cooke album sounds as good today as it did decades ago. The Godfather or The Shining, they're as watchable as they were on the night of their release. Or maybe it's because games are interactive in a way no other art form is, so even mediocre experiences feel less passive, and I'm not a passive guy. Either way, this game needs to go away for 5 years. Take the combat and perfect it. Take the parkour system and perfect it. Shrink the map. Craft areas that cater to gameplay rather than gameplay that caters to areas. I'm not sure that's in the cards. The game sold pretty well, it seems, so by business standards, it was perfect. But it's possible. All it requires is stopping and asking the right questions. What about this game is the core concept? What's the most fun part? How do we make levels and areas that let the player use those fun tools in the most immersive way possible? The game needs to be entirely rethought from the ground up. In the meantime, I guess that means I'll have nothing to do but keep writing and making videos about games. And that kinda sucks. Alright, bye.